Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. Well, it's past 12, so it's good afternoon. Everyone's happy to be home. I'm happy to be home too. I love teaching from home because I get to sit at home and do what I love, which is to teach without having to be on that long, long bus drive all the way over there and then have to teach a couple of classes and then wait a long, long, long time until my bus ride home. So it's wonderful for me. I'm sorry that some of you don't get to go home, but at least you get some peace and quiet and you get to do this without all the confusion that goes on in some of those classes when we're all there at school. Here is what we're going to do. Today we're going to talk about challenges. We have already talked a little bit about that a few months back. I don't know if you remember, so let me refresh your memory. I'd like you to open your books to the first page of chapter 3. It looks like this. I hope you can see it. It says challenges. It is the very first page of the chapter. Challenges. I wonder if everyone has taken their book home, but if you haven't, hit me up either on Facebook, email, anywhere, Canvas, anywhere, and then I'll send you pictures of the pages. Do it right now, so before we get fully started, you can look at the pages. I have a phone here with me so I can send it to you, because I took pictures of the pages earlier. Challenges. We talked about challenges before. I'll refresh your memory a little bit. We talked about some people that had things that would be considered challenges, but they turned those things into positives and they worked towards their advantages. We talked about Jamie Oliver. Remember that? We talked about him. We talked about the swimmer Michael Phelps. We talked about certain aspects of learning, such as dyslexia. And I believe that I even brought up Tom Cruise. Even though he is dyslexic, he is able to memorize scripts. He is able to act, direct, produce, and he's very successful at it. So he turned that into a positive. And there are lots of positive aspects of having a learning disability. You may not have the same capacity to do certain things in the same way as other people, but you still have some strengths that work to your advantage. We talked about this a few months ago. I'd like to start by showing you the pages. This is also on your book, and this page represents challenges. Let's look at the page. There are some pictures. I want you to tell me which symbols you recognize from it. If there's anything that screams challenges to you. Anything. Type it in the chat box for me. All right. I expected some of you to pick this out, but I also, if nobody pointed it out, of course I'm going to point it out. What screams challenges to me straight away is when I see the woman with very long hair and the little girl carrying something on their heads. What is that? So, often enough, when you look at something, it is a matter of interpretation. What is it that you see? I may look at the same thing as the next door neighbor is looking at, and we can look at that and see different things. What do I see? Well, as a lot of you may know, I lived in Brazil for off and on for 26 years. I also lived in the States. I grew up a little bit in the States. I went to high school in the States. I lived in Australia. When I was getting my master's degree, I lived in New Zealand, where I did research studies of a different type of English. Since I was so used to American English, American, so I went to New Zealand. I have been living in Norway for almost 20 years. I have been to countries such as Denmark, Sweden, Peru, Argentina, Germany. I think that's it. I haven't been to as many countries as people would expect. But anyway, the reason why I'm bringing this up is that my perception of how I see things has something to do with where I've been. When I was living in Brazil, a very common occurrence would be, let me zoom this and show you what I am talking about. If you haven't seen it yet, it's a bit pixelated now, but I'm gonna fix it. I am talking about the little girl and the woman with the very long hair. And they're carrying something on their heads. I am thinking challenges. I've seen many times in my childhood women walking around the streets. Of course, I know that a lot of people assume, oh, you lived in Brazil, you were born there, so you must have lived in poverty, and you were probably a street kid, and you probably came to Norway for a better life. That was not the case. I could probably tell a sob story to make myself more interesting, but no, I was a privileged individual. My father was an engineer, my mom was a teacher. They were both educated, and in Brazil, education is freedom, pretty much. But let's go straight past that. A lot of women, their job was to wash clothes for others. They were a laundry service, but not a laundry service as you would expect it to be. They would go to your house, they would get a very large sheet, they would put clothes into that sheet, they would tie it up and make a huge bundle and put it on their heads and carry it to their homes, where they would wash it by hand, air dry it, and then a week later they would bring it to your house. Some of these women, they also would iron the clothes for you. They would go to your place or take it out. They would bring it on their heads like that. Some of them took a bus with that, with a load of laundry. Some of them just walked the whole way with the laundry on their heads. And they would go to your house, deliver your clothes back to you, washed, and then they would iron the clothes for you, and they got money for that. We had somebody that did that for us, and she passed away a few years ago, and she was a tremendous storyteller because of those experiences, going from place to place. And I see the little girl with the woman carrying something on their heads. I'm not sure if they're carrying a load of clothing. It is a drawing, so when you look at a drawing, you can interpret it as anything, really. I'm seeing that because it relates to my childhood, seeing somebody do that. She had, I think, 7 or 8 kids, if I'm not mistaken. And she would always have one of the kids with her, or maybe a couple of the kids with her, also carrying stuff with her. And that's how they made their money. Challenges. No transportation. They didn't have a car, but they powered through whatever was happening, and they walked to their work to get that money. Another challenge, the weight of that load of clothing on top of their heads. Right? If that's not a challenge, I don't know what is. And they were extremely hardworking people. So that's what I see. And that's what jumps up at me when I look at this drawing. Different people will see different things. I'm sure, as somebody pointed it out, it could be water. Those could be containers, and they were carrying water back to their homes. Maybe they're selling that water somewhere. So there are lots of interpretations to a draw, because if it's a drawing, if it's a painting, different people will look at the same painting and see different things and have a different interpretation. I'd like to hear yours, of course. There are other challenges here too. If you look at it, you might even, all right, the polar bear. Here's the polar bear at the very center of this picture, in the very middle of it, in the center of it. The polar bear is he's standing in a very limited amount of space. And we see that he's standing there by himself. I'm saying him. I always think of I think of bears in general as males. I don't know if it's the first thing that comes to mind to you. Type in the chat and let me know. But what I see is a bear standing alone in a very limited amount of space. What can we think about in this day and age? Global warming. The icebergs melting. The ice in this world, and the temperatures rising, and all of a sudden his natural habitat is no longer what it used to be. He doesn't have as much space as he used to have. That's a challenge for that polar bear, and there is a chain of events attached to that. One thing changes, and there are minor changes and major changes related to that as well. So we can think about that polar bear and what it signifies. What kind of symbolic value does that polar bear have in relation to what's happening in the world? What kind of challenges can we face due to global warming? This is for you to think about, and I want you to type in the chat box any ideas that you have, and I'll be responding in the chat box to you. Here we see a family. If you look closely, perhaps I should move a little bit so that you can see more. If you look closely, you see that this family is carrying what seems to be a large amount of their belongings. What could suggest they don't have a place to live. What challenges do they face being a homeless family? Where would they find shelter? Perhaps they lost the place where they used to live. Perhaps they lost that because the man and the woman, maybe they no longer have jobs. She is carrying a baby and they have another child. What kind of challenges do they face? Finding houses, finding a place to live, finding a new job. There are lots of challenges in that. What is the word in our region for the word challenge in English? Type in the chat box if you know. Utfordring. Sorry if I'm butchering it. Utfordring. Challenge. So here we have the entire chapter is about challenges. We have read some of the texts and we have discussed some of this. Even if you don't remember, I want you to look at this symbol here and tell me what you think about when you see this symbol. Tell me what you think about when you see this symbol. Type it in the chat box for me. I might be seeing the same thing as you. Different people might see different things. It's very important to take into consideration that you can have an entirely different narrative from what I have said that I see. So I want to invite you to look at that with your own interpretation of what you see and tell me, what is that symbol? What does that represent? How does that equate with challenges? Anybody that said recycle is right. That's what it is. If I seem frozen, I was not frozen. I took a picture of the screen because I needed to do something with it. Recycling. What kind of challenges? What kind of challenges are there with recycling? Type in the chat box, what kind of things make it hard to recycle? Not everybody wants to do it, right? People don't do it properly. They don't know what to recycle. So those are all challenges. So there are lots of different interpretations that we can have based off of what we see. And what I want to do now with you is talk about some of the topics for the chapter. We have discussed some of it before. We have read and analyzed some of the texts. We have gone through some of it, but we're going back to the beginning just to look at some of the fundamentals of what you're supposed to absorb and learn from this chapter. At the very top of the page, you see a quote by Martin Luther King Jr. The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. So it's very easy to be amazing and fantastic and great. When everything is going well for you, right? You see somebody who has money, has a good job, has a good family, they're happy, everything is perfect in their lives, right? And then you look at that person, there are no challenges. Their lives are pretty squared up, everything's fine. But then there comes a moment where something bad happens in their lives and they're forced to overcome an obstacle. That's when you know, that's when you know who that person really is when something bad is happening and they have to overcome it. How will they stand? Will they be strong? Or will they fall apart and not know what to do? Or will they think of creative solutions to overcome those obstacles? That's what that quote means. Does anybody know who Martin Luther King was? Type it in the chat box. Martin Luther King was incredibly important for the civil rights movement in the United States. He wanted equality for blacks and whites in the United States. He is the author of that beautiful text and speech, I Have a Dream, right? He wanted people to be judged by the content of their character and not the color of their skin. So if some of you know that, I am impressed that you know this is part of the history of the United States, part of world history, really, and very relevant in times of Black Lives Matter movement, which is a movement that has, of course, its advantages and disadvantages. There are people perhaps using that as an excuse to go off and vandalize places and torture and kill, and that is not justifiable in any way. Equality is important. How to achieve that? Through protesting peacefully without anybody getting hurt. Perhaps that's my opinion, that's probably the best way. Talking about challenges. Let's continue on that. Some people see facing and overcoming challenges as a necessary part of growing up. Others see challenges as obstacles that can be turned into advantages. However, most people would agree that some challenges are easier to face if you don't have to face them all by yourself. Learning how other people have coped can provide us with tools to help us handle challenges of our own. So here at the introduction, you can see that a collective type of thinking, cooperation, togetherness, a group of people can face challenges better than one person alone. Some challenges concern you on a personal level, while others we need to face together as citizens of a community. Climate change, and that brings us back to the picture where we see the polar bear standing alone on that block of ice. Climate change, war, migration, and gender inequality engage and involve entire communities, perhaps even the entire population of this planet. When we look for solutions to these issues, it can be easy to forget the human aspect and that the actions we choose or don't choose can have consequences not only for ourselves, but for people in other parts of the world as well. Listening to their stories and seeing the world from their perspectives can perhaps help us make better decisions for our common future. We are going to talk about these issues. We're not going to talk about everything, but I want you to pick. Let's take a look at this. I want you to pick one of the issues that you see presented to you in that picture, maybe you don't see what I see. Maybe you see something different that you want to explore. Which of the obstacles would be the most difficult to overcome? And what could you do creatively to overcome that obstacle? I don't want you to write a long paragraph about it or anything. I want you to write, choose the obstacle, whatever it is, the challenge. 2, solution, a creative solution to it. Alright? Dere skal velge en utfordring som dere ser på bildet. Dere skal velge en av situasjonene som står der på bildet, fordi jeg snakket litt om hva jeg ser på bildet. Kanskje du også ser noe som jeg ser. Da kan du velge en ting som du ser, en utfordring på bildet, og da kan du velge en løsning for det. Så du skal skrive minst 2 setninger om det. Det er det som er oppgave som dere skal gjøre. Og det tar 5 minutter, kanskje 10. So you're going to choose one obstacle that you see in this picture, and you're going to think of one solution. En utfordring, en løsning. And then you can write at least 2 sentences for me. Next. Let's take a look. So hold on to that thought. Don't start doing that yet, because that's what you're going to do after we wrap up here. You're going to do that. Right? After we do our Quizlet live thing, after we finish that, then you're going to sit down wherever you are and you're going to do that. And this, what I'm going to talk about now. Here's a situation. It's on your book. It's either page 116, 117, something like that. I'm looking at a picture of the book right now, so I don't see what the page is. But you'll find it. I believe that you'll find it. And if you don't find it, hit me up and I'll send you a picture of it. Right. Stuart Phillips, 25 years old, installation electrician. Let's look at the situation. I got angry with a colleague the other day because I was really close to suffering a major injury. I was going to install the water heater in a bungalow just outside town. A colleague of mine had been there the day before and done the wiring. What he hadn't done was update the circuit inventory after regrouping the circuits. This meant that when I disconnected the breaker according to the list, the circuit I was going to work on was live. Of course, as an electrician, you're not supposed to go fiddling with wires without first cross-checking. But then again, it's easy to simply trust a colleague to have done his part of the job. Anyway, I tested the circuit, found it live, then located the right circuit and disconnected it. And corrected the inventory, of course. Back at the office, I spent a few minutes yelling at my colleague. Now, those of you who are doing... Well, I'm not sure who's going to see this. I have to be honest with you, I don't know who's there today. If it's the health and healthcare workers, or if it's the construction workers and the electricians and the carpenters. So if it is that group with the electricians, they're going to get a kick out of this. But if it's the nurses, it might not be the most fun to write about. But this is about language skills, and everybody should be able to power through and do it. Pretend you are Stuart Phillips and that what he describes below happened to you. Write a report to your boss with information about the incident. You might need to make up more information about the incident to write a detailed report. For help on writing reports, see page 266. So you would like to report the injury that you could have suffered based off of this. You could have gotten electrocuted. You could have died, right? So you can write this as a report. A report has to be a more official type of writing. So please refer to page 266, and you can write a short report about this incident. Remember, you have 2 things to do today. You're going to go back, look at this picture, pick 2 challenges. Pick 1 challenge and think of a creative solution to how to overcome that challenge. And the next assignment is read the situation here and write a report to your boss. That's your assignment for the day, these 2 things. I want you to be very, how do I put it? I want you to be I know that it's not always the easiest thing to create text, and I know that not everybody likes to write, so you can write us a short text about that. Doesn't need to be a long thing. What we're going to do now, we're going to do Quizlet Live, and then you will have time to sit and do that. You're going to get a code from me. This is general vocabulary. Once everybody is in, we can start. This is general vocabulary. It's not vocabulary specific to any chapter. It's general vocabulary. Once everybody's in, then we can start. Use the code that I just put in the chat box. Do not use the code that's on there, because this is just for me so that I can actually play as you play, so that you can see some hints on the screen. Please do your assignments and send them to me. You can use Canvas. You can send them to me via Facebook. You can send them to me on the school email, anywhere that you can reach me. All right?